And I'm also going to turn on the AI companion to help Aditi take the notes. Perfect. Okay. So this is a meeting of the City Seal Task Force. We have a quorum of 6 people, so we can go ahead and get started. Per usual, I'll start with roll call. So let me just pull up my list here. Just 1 second. I had it open and of course I closed it at the last second. Okay. Aditi Alawat,
Present.
Suzanne Barnes.
Present.
Pucci is not present. We will see if she logs in later. I did not hear from her. Michael Feener,
Present.
VJ Joyce,
Present.
Dakota Russell just logged on for roll call. Perfect timing, Dakota. So Dakota's present. Rachel Tomvat should also be coming, so she'll be here momentarily, I assume. And Noreen, oh, sorry, Noreen Gashinard is not present. And finally, Eileen Simons is present, although on mute. Yeah, Eileen, you can mark Eileen as present. I'm not sure if her camera or something's wrong. Okay. Moving on. Per usual, we do the approval of the minutes. Oh, and Rachel just logged on, so we just finished roll call. So for the approval of the minutes, it appears that there were some email exchanges for edits flagged in the minutes. And since we're using the AI tool used to draft them, I want to make sure that everything is accurate before we make a formal motion to approve them. So if it's okay with everybody, we can table this until next meeting when we have a chance to look at that and make some edits. Are people okay with that?
Sure. So that would be for
Yes.
the October 7th meeting or for the next regular meeting at the end?
Excellent question. October 7th.
October 7th. Okay.
Yeah, we won't do this during the listening session tomorrow.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so just to make a formal motion, can I get a formal motion to table the minutes until the October 7th meeting?
So moved.
Can I
I'll
get a
second.
second? Perfect. And all those in favor, raise hand. Perfect. So we'll move that to the October 7th meeting. Okay. And without further ado, we have a presentation by Professor Erika Lee. And so Dakota, I'll pass it off to you to introduce her.
Absolutely, happy to. Hang on, I'm going to find my official bio here. All right, folks. Erika Lee is an award-winning historian, professor, and author, the Bay Family Professor of History, Radcliffe Alumni Professor, and the Forsheimer, Foundation Director of the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America at Harvard University. She is the author of several prize-winning books, including Angel Island, Immigrant Gateway to America, The Making of Asian America, A History, and America for Americans, A History of Xenophobia in the United States. Her essays have appeared in over 3 dozen journals and anthologies, including the instant New York Times bestselling book, Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Lies and Legends About Our Past. Past president of the Organization of American Historians, Lee is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and testified before Congress in its historic hearings on anti-Asian discrimination and violence in 2021. I will also say on a personal note, I know Erika Little from my time with the Hard Mountain Wyoming Foundation. Her book, America for Americans, about xenophobia was, our big read around Heart Mountain during COVID, and really did a lot to inform our exhibit that we put together during that time on the racialization of disease. So I am personally a big fan, and I'm really excited to hearing her remarks today.
Thank you, Dakota. And I was just at Heart Mountain over the summer. I went to the
Oh, fantastic.
pilgrimage. It was so phenomenal. Yeah, I hope to connect another time just to talk about your work there and also what you're doing in Salem. But hi, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for allowing me to join you. I'm so impressed with the work, research, engagement, public discussion that has been going on over these past several months. And I'm really honored to join you and hope I can provide some insight and look forward to any questions. Regina, am I able to share screens?
Oh, that's a good point. You will in a second. Oh,
Oh,
I think
can you?
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
excellent. That worked.
Good. Great. Okay. Um, Let me know if there's any problems. And hopefully between us we can fix it. So hello again. As you've heard, I'm a historian of the United States. I focus specifically on immigration, Asian Americans, the long history of U.S.-Asian relations, and I'm also deeply engaged in public history. So again, I'm really impressed with the work that you're doing. I'm sure that you know. Sometimes, many times, these discussions and open inquiry and engagement don't always happen when communities are debating what should be changed, what should be kept, et cetera. So I think that you're really doing some great work. I've had the pleasure of diving deep into Salem's history, reading a lot of works by popular historians, bloggers, but especially the historical records, the deep scholarship and archival work that I've done at the Peabody Essex's Phillips Library. And it's been a real joy to learn about this rich but also complicated histories. And so I'm going to share a little bit of what I do as a historian, which is to ask a lot of questions and to do as much research as I can to make connections. Sometimes there are more questions than answers that I end up with, but I hope that what I've explored helps inform the decisions that you and others will be making. And so for starters, I thought it would be really important to understand this very first question, which is what was Salem like in the 1830s when the city seal was designed and approved? And what was the seal's intended message? And so when I read the historical scholarship, it's very, very clear that the seal was designed to promote the identity of Salem as a peaceful place of global commerce. I know that you've looked at all of the variations of the city seals, but of course it's helpful to think about the official description. So this is from the historical collections of the Essex Institute in 1866, when they described the seal in this way. In the center, there is a shield bearing upon it a ship under full sail, approaching a coast, designated by the costume of the person standing upon it and by the trees near him as a portion of the East Indies. Beneath the shield, this motto, translated from Latin, to the farthest port of the rich East. And above the shield, a dove bearing an olive branch in her mouth. So it's not surprising that um, symbolizing Salem's rich history of trade with Asia take center stage in the city seal. Of course, Asian trade transformed the city and its residents. It financed some of the city's greatest architecture and institutions. But I thought it would be helpful to dig deeper into the timing and also the designer of the seal to better understand the factors that might have shaped its specific design. So the City Council approved the seal on March 11th, 1839, and the designer, as I know all of you know already, was City Alderman George Peabody, the son of Joseph Peabody, one of Salem's most influential merchant ship owners. So of course, it's not surprising why he would be drawn to a design celebrating global trade. This is a painting of the Peabody ship, George, named for City Alderman George Peabody. Joseph Peabody built and owned 83 ships. They were sent throughout the world, especially to Asia. He employed 7,000 seamen on his ships. But by the time that the city council is voting to approve the design that George Peabody submitted, the city's great maritime tradition is actually at risk. Trade with Asia had been declining since the 1810s, especially with Sumatra, and it was becoming increasingly volatile economically and dangerous. With these changes came economic instability and anxiety. And I think this is a really helpful context because we know in public debates over keeping statues, tearing down statues, instability, cultural, economic, political anxiety are often pretexts. They're often the foundations to decisions that communities make. So in the 1830s, trade is declining, profits are declining, it's becoming increasingly volatile and violent. And we see that city leaders are beginning to look back to the recent past, to this golden age of trade with nostalgia. And I urge you, task members and others who are interested, to check out the recent work, a dissertation written by historian Anthony Guidon. He teaches at Radford University. It's the most recent work on Salem's history, especially in relationship to US-Asian trade. And he's written that at this time, the design of the seal was meant to, quote, enshrine an older generation as the creators of Salem's era of prosperity. So in other words, the seal was designed to remind city residents that it had been the shipmasters and the merchants who had brought them fame and fortune. The design also helped leaders to recast the city's identity as a Puritan outpost and as a site of the witch trials, both important contexts. This celebration of Salem's trade with Asia persisted and grew even stronger in the subsequent decades. When you pick up any classic history of Salem and trade with Asia, such as George Putnam's 1922 book, Salem Vessels and Their Voyages, or James Phillips' 1947 book, Salem and the Indies, we see that this celebration of both the sailors, the merchant shipmen, and trade is just very, very strong part of the city's identity. But I felt that this version that only focuses on the benefits of Salem's trade with Asia leaves out a lot. And so this led me to my second question, which is, what other histories of 19th century Salem are important to keep in mind as we seek to understand the design and also the meaning of the city seal? There are other, more complicated aspects of this history that are less well known, including the fact that Salem's trade with Asia supported the institution of slavery. Professor Guidone details how Salem's Asian trade was deeply rooted in the Caribbean plantation and slave-based economy, which created a profitable commercial circuit and kept the institution of slavery running and profitable. While city boosters characterized trade with Asia as exemplifying commercial honor, enterprise, and success, the historical record also documents unfair practices, such as shipmasters, both from the UK as well as the United States, using false weights to then create create unfair practices, cheated Sumatran pepper growers essentially from their fair profits, fair share of the profits. This is an account by James Gold. He wrote 3 different articles on America's trade with Sumatra. They were published in the Essex Institute Historical Collections. And this is an account of those unfair practices of using false weights from again, one of the leading historians of this trade. He found that this practice, unsurprisingly, created a great deal of resentment and anger amongst the Achenese. The pepper trade could also be violent. In early February of 1831, the Friendship, a Salem merchant ship owned by Nathaniel Silsby, Dudley Peckham, and Robert Stone, and captained by Charles Endicott, anchored off Kuala Batu in Aceh province. The ship was being loaded. Some of the crew stayed on board. The majority was offshore. And at that time of boarding, some locals came onto the ship, attacked the crew, and killed 3. The ship was emptied of its cargo. Captain Endicott was hearing the cries from on shore, was able to regain control of the Friendship with the help of a few other American ships close by. And 6 months later, he returned the ravaged and empty vessel to Salem. He explained that the ship had been attacked for no reason. He blamed the, quote, treachery and perfidy of the local people. He called on the need for the American government to intervene. So this is 1831. President Andrew Jackson was in the White House, and along with Secretary of the Navy Levi Woodbury, he promised, quote, immediate redress for the outrage committed. In his address to Congress, President Jackson pledged to uphold the U.S.'s national honor against, quote, savage threats, and he ordered a U.S. Navy warship to the coast of Sumatra. He argued that the Sumatran people were, quote, in such a state of society that the usual course of proceedings between civilized nations could not be pursued. In other words, what the president was saying was that the people of Sumatra were lawless, dishonest, and could not be reasoned with. On August 9, 1831, Secretary Woodbury ordered Commodore John Downes and the USS Potomac, the first U.S. warship of her class to circle the globe, to Kuala Batu to demand indemnity and punishment for the attackers. Instead, the Potomac launched a punitive raid on Kuala Batu from February 6th through 9th, 1832. Its captain decided to disguise the Potomac as a Danish merchant ship. He essentially used a Danish flag, hoisted it up, and did not approach in all disclosure. He attacked the port without demanding restitution. 281 sailors and Marines went on shore while the ship fired its weapons. Francis Warner was a chaplain who served aboard the Potomac, and he wrote this following account. Quote, cannon and musketry came thundering across the water, told us plainly that the work of death was going on. Sheets of fire were arising from the town wrapped in flames. 3 forts were attacked and destroyed. All local defenders were killed. Fleeing civilians were also killed. Here again, Warner describes, quote, men, women, and children were seen flying in every direction, carrying the few articles they were able to seize, and some of the men were cut down in their flight. The town, including the central bazaar and most of the private dwellings, was largely destroyed, and U.S. Marines looted everything else of value. It was over in just 2.5 hours. Approximately 150 local Sumatrans were killed, including civilians. 2 Americans were killed, 11 were wounded. When news of the attack first made it into American newspapers some 5 months later, Captain Downes' actions did cause some stir in Washington, D.C. but public opinion, including in Salem, seemed to mostly approve. Here's two examples from the press at that time. One is from the New York Evening Post, July 5th, 1832, and another from the Salem Gazette just 5 days later, which is essentially the same article, just reprinted in the Salem Gazette. And here's just a short excerpt describing the attack and justifying the attack. Quote, "The tribe to which the piratical wretches belonged, who murdered the crew of the Friendship, have been taught that their victims were of a nation that can stretch its arm over continents and seas to protect its citizens and to avenge their blood." Popular support for the attack can also be seen in this broadside titled The Battle of Kuala Batu in 1832. The text is filled with glorifying U.S. forces, praising U.S. military discipline, justifying the attacks as a defense of national honor. At the same time, it denigrates the people of Kuala Batu, vilifying them as pirates, as savages, as hostile Malay. And when historians have analyzed the attack, they've painted it as an example of a violent and armed intrusion into Asia and overreach by the US government. Some have even made connections to the US conduct during the Vietnam War when innocent civilians were killed. Others have raised sharp questions about whether the US's disproportionate response was ethical. But the attack on Kuala Batu in 1832 was not the only example of the violence that was part of Salem's pepper trade. In 1838, another ship, the Eclipse, this one owned by Joseph Peabody, father of the City Seal's designer, was attacked while trading at Truman on the west coast of Sumatra. The captain of the Eclipse, along with another crew member, was murdered. Nearly $20,000 in silver and 4 cases of opium were stolen. Commodore George C. Reed, commanding the U.S. frigate Columbia, which was off of the coast of Ceylon, sailed directly to Sumatra. Negotiations for the surrender of perpetrators and compensation for the lost property failed. The Columbia and another Navy warship, the John Adams, then fired on Kuala Batu again. They then sailed to Muki, another nearby coastal village, and on January 1st, 1839, the Columbia opened fire. 350 sailors and Marines landed and burned down the town as the band played Yankee Doodle Dandy. The destruction was extensive again. William Meacham Merle, a member of the Columbia's crew, recalled, and you can see the excerpt here, or part of the excerpt, "We marched into town and commenced setting fire to the same. At the same time, the forts were leveled, the guns spiked, and everything destroyed which was deemed of value to the natives. The town was burnt to the ground, leaving naught but a mass of ruins." Although exact numbers are not provided, this account clearly describes loss of life among the Sumatran defenders and civilians, noting wounded and dead discovered in the ruins of the town. The damage to the area was estimated at $180,000. This is in 1838. And again, like the previous attack on Kuala Batu, this one was celebrated in New England, where this account describing the defeat of the so-called Dark Malay, his hands steeped in blood, was published. So this history invites us to reconsider just how peaceful and glorified the city's trade with Asia really was. In fact, the U.S. attacks by the 2 naval warships in 1832 and 1838 were the first and second punitive expeditions by the U.S. Navy in U.S. history. I did not know these facts before I started doing this research, and I believe that they are mostly forgotten and remain ignored in most of our history textbooks. But it would seem that Salem's leaders and residents were well aware of what was happening in Sumatra. It was the news of the town. These were their ships. These were their their sailors, and some had called for retribution, like Captain Endicott. So let's stick with the 1830s, this decade of anxiety, but also violence, to consider the meaning and impact of the city seal design on Salem residents back then. After all, commemorative objects like flags and statues, plaques and monuments, and city seals are not neutral symbols. They impart meaning, and individuals and communities who interact with them also extract meaning from them. So this led me to my next question, which is, what did the symbol of an Asian person like the one on the city seal mean to Salemites in the 1830s? And also, why focus on a figure or a person? There are many ways to celebrate the city's trade with Asia, maybe a pepper plant or ships, etc. The historical record, at least as far as I could find, do not provide any evidence that the figure represented a real person. But both historians and art historians have made abundantly clear that the artistic elements of a figure, a vaguely Asian person dressed in Oriental fashioned robes with an umbrella, was a very popular motif in 18th and 19th century chinoiserie objects in Europe and in the United States. They explained that chinoiserie style and objects were not authentic representations of Chinese or Asian cultures or arts, but were manufactured to appeal to what Europeans and Americans believed to be typical of Chinese or Asian cultures. Oftentimes, these images blended together various kinds of dress or symbols or motifs or religious iconography unique to specific empires or regions and peoples into kind of a homogenized, flat Oriental style. And it's important to note that this is not a sign of respect. So we might read this figure as a caricature, an exaggerated imitation of what some might believe Asian peoples were like. And given the violence that characterized the pepper trade, at least during this decade, at the time that the seal was designed and approved, we may want to take a closer examination of what the symbols of peace on the seal represent, but also what they might hide. And as I was thinking about this, I was struck by the similarity to the frequent use of Native American or indigenous peoples as noble savages in various city seals and state flags and other national symbols in the 19th century. Scholars have shown how these images were intended to symbolize American ideals of democracy and liberty and equality, but they did not represent real relations between the US and American Indians. When we place those images within historical context in which they were created, we see that the imagery was highly popular, the noble savage, at the same time that the US was pursuing westward expansion, forced expulsion of indigenous peoples from their lands, broken treaties, and wars. These symbols had the effect of hiding this violence. Again, the symbol of the peaceful, noble savage had the effect of hiding this violence in favor of a sanitized and romanticized version of both history and contemporary events. So this is one context in which we might continue to explore the meaning of the city seal's representation of Asian peoples. But to gain even more insight into the historical context in which the seal was created, I thought it was important to think about the way in which the seal connects to other ways in which Asia, Asian goods, and Asian peoples were represented and treated in Salem, the Northeast, and the United States in the early 19th century. There's a lot of research that's been done on the popular use of Asian motifs in Salem's architecture. I've relied on the scholarship of people like Patricia Johnson and Carolyn Frank and others, and they've shown that Americans enthusiastically collected imported tea and porcelain furniture and other decorative arts and objects from Asia, particularly China, in the late 18th and early 19th century. And they also show that these imports were not only treasured symbols of travels abroad, but also signs of cosmopolitanism, sophistication, refinement, and also wealth. They were especially important for American elites in identifying or showing a distance, a new American identity that was different from that of Great Britain. So one can see, and I'm sure that you can show me great examples of this fascination with Asia in architectural motifs and wallpapers and furniture in some of Salem's grandest houses of this time. But again, this admiration for Asian objects did not always extend to Asian people themselves in Salem, in Massachusetts, in the United States, or in Asia. Instead, Asian people were often denigrated in both words and deeds. Salem's Captain Endicott of the Friendship, for example, justified the violent attack on Kuala Batu by claiming that the people of Aceh, not just the attackers, but all of the people of the province were, quote, the most subtle, crafty, and treacherous of all the nations of the East. They were lawless and dishonorable. Later in his account, he describes them as, quote, a tribe of monkeys who looked ridiculous, donning European-style clothing from the looted ship. Historian Patricia Johnson has studied Salem seamen's journals, logs, and letters to ask what they thought of their Asian trading partners. She found that there were indeed examples of valued friendship and exchange, but that in general, their papers and letters left behind leave, quote, no doubt that they believed in their and the US's cultural superiority, she explains. They saw Asians as dishonest, superstitious, cruel, and corrupt. And the collection of Asian curiosities in the East India Marine Society's museum, including life-size figures of Chinese and Indian merchants, palanquins, and Asian religious sculptures labeled as idols, were presented through a selective lens that emphasized idolatry, excess, and racial and cultural inferiority. Historian George Schwartz writes of the collection that while these goods were presented as educational, they were also deeply exoticized and depoliticized. According to other scholars, these attitudes were further celebrated in public events in Salem, in which Asians were portrayed as subordinates and servants in the city's public festivals celebrating commerce, or when others donned Asian clothes or costumes and performed in Oriental identities. In January of 1804, for example, the East India Marine Society commemorated its annual meeting with a parade. Sea captains who had just returned from Sumatra, Bombay, Calcutta, Canton, Manila, and other Asian ports all participated. The Reverend William Bentley, pastor of the East Church, was there and watched the parade. And he explained in his diary, quote, each of the brethren bore some Indian curiosity, and the palanquin was borne by the Negroes dressed nearly in the Indian manner. A person dressed in Chinese habits and mask passed in front. The crowd of spectators was great. Scholars refer to such performances as yellowface. They were generally not respectful presentations of Asian cultures, but were designed to amuse, to astonish, to mock. Museum critics have interpreted these activities as cultural masquerades that depicted Asianness as something alien to be donned, but then discarded. So these particular representations of Asia and Asian peoples in the 19th century led me to one last question. And that is, how does the seal symbolism connect to the history and lived experiences of Asians and other people of color in early America? And it's important to recognize that America's trade with Asia brought not only goods, but people, including many sailors who could be found in port cities like Salem and Baltimore. But they were routinely treated quite unequally, exploited, and even abused. This is one of my favorite teaching documents. It's a 1785 petition from a Bengali sailor named Sikh Kisar. It's one of the earliest records that we have of Asians in early America. And it's pretty phenomenal that it has not only survived, but also what it tells us. He was a sailor who was under the employ of a captain named John O'Donnell. And in this petition, he charges Captain O'Donnell with forcing him and 35 other countrymen to sail from a ship starting in Batavia, present-day Indonesia, to Baltimore, during which time the men were fed only a biscuit a day, and Kisar's 12-year-old son was kept from him. Another one of my favorite teaching documents representing the history of early Asians in early America is this one that portrays a woman named Ah Fang Moi. She's the first recorded Chinese woman to come to the United States in 1834. She was brought as a 19-year-old on a merchant ship that docked in New York City. It was a merchant ship full of imported Chinese furniture and decorative art. She was put on display in a New York City exhibit for 8 hours a day. Her job was to lure visitors who were charged 50 cents to marvel at, quote, the exotic traveler from the Far East. And the hope by the merchants who brought her to New York City, the hope was that these spectators would come and look at Ah Fang Moi and then buy some of the Asian furniture that was on display as well. Ah Fang Moi was later added to the Barnum Circus and toured around with other human curiosities. Her treatment would be a precursor to how later arrivals from Asia would be seen and treated. In Salem, historian Anthony Guidoni unearths the history of Asian sailors in the city to argue that although global trade created a social context with increased racial and cultural diversity, white residents often did not see their non-white neighbors as equals. In particular, he found out the fascinating story of an Indian sailor named Brundi Sabari, who arrived in Salem in 1799. He unwittingly became the butt of political jokes when Salem journalists associated him with the liquor brandy, as well as drunkenness and corruption. The term Brundy stories became political shorthand for libelous slander in Salem for years afterward. And it wasn't just Brundi Sabari who faced social marginalization. Historian Guidoni writes that Asian sailors and migrants were relegated to lower social status on and off ships, often serving as servants to white people. And between 1833 and 1865, all people of color were barred from entering the East India Marine Hall in total. It's important to note that Salem was not alone in these practices. U.S. laws upheld unequal treatment. At the same time that the city seal was designed, Asian immigrants were prohibited from becoming naturalized U.S. citizens, and these laws would not be changed until World War II and until the 1950s. So let me conclude by sharing the sources of my research. and by briefly summarizing the main points of what I've found. I've started with examining the historical context in which the city seal was created and designed and explored its different meanings. The history tells us much about the message that city leaders wanted to promote. That is, a celebration of the city's trade with Asia and the great men that had made it happen. But while city boosters touted this positive history, this positive portrayal of trade with Asia, the historical record paints a much more complicated picture that includes extreme violence. The first and second punitive Sumatran expeditions undertaken by the US government in response to attacks on Salem ships resulted in the deaths of hundreds along the Sumatran Pepper Coast. Historians studying these actions identify them as laying the foundation for centuries of controversial US intervention in Asia. The second thing that I explored was how Asian figures like the one portrayed on the seal were very popular in early 19th century America, but that given how chinoiserie style and objects reflected Americans' imagined understandings of Asia and Asian peoples, we might want to consider whether the figure on the seal is similarly a manufactured caricature or imagination that mirrored the unequal status of Asians in the US at the time. For the historical record is clear in documenting how Asians in early America were socially, economically, and politically marginalized, considered unfit for US citizenship, and racially inferior. These attitudes would harden and expand, leading to the passage of discriminatory immigration laws that singled out Chinese, Japanese, Korean, South Asian, and Filipino migrants for immigration exclusion beginning in 1875 and lasting into the mid-20th century. In short, the meaning of Salem City Seal is not just confined to Salem and to the decade of the 1830s when it was approved. The historical forces shaping its design were part of larger national and global economies, cultural practices, and politics that had long-lasting effects. This is a complicated history, and like I started with, I still have more questions, even partially answering the questions that I began with. And I know that these are just some among the many that I hope that you, as members of the task force, will continue to explore. But thank you again for allowing me to join you, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Sure, I can start off the questions. First off, wow, thank you for that presentation. That was incredibly comprehensive and nuanced and well researched. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think I heard I think somebody told me that you were visiting the Peabody Essex Museum and getting all sorts of sources from that. So I just wanted to say, like, yeah, the research, the thorough research shows through in your presentation. So huge thank you for that. Um, this might be a little bit of a random question, but as you may know, there is a huge replica of the Friendship in Salem, and it's actually a tourist attraction. And this actually came up in the context of the Salem 400 plus conversations because some people brought up the concerning history associated with the Friendship. But then somebody pointed out that the friendship that is not the same friendship. So I just wanted to clarify that piece, if you can speak to that, because I think a lot of people watching might hear the friendship and immediately associate it with the one that we have a replica of.
It's my understanding that it is not the same ship, that there are actually many unsurprisingly, there are many ships called the Friendship, and that these are two different ships. However, my visit to the PBD Essex Museum did reveal a great find, and that is there's a very well-known, and it's on display, a beautifully painted china plate painted with the friendship that was attacked in 1831, and it was clearly manufactured and painted in Guangzhou in southern China, probably directly after the ship had been attacked. And then Endicott sailed it to Canton. And so that's just an interesting little piece of the puzzle. And it does show, I believe, smoke coming from the ship. So that ship is, and its attack is preserved, if you will, in a china plate that's still on display in the PBD Essex. But I do not think it's the same one, the big replica that's on display.
So let's start with Michael and then go to Suzanne.
Great. Thank you very much, Erica. Really enjoyed the presentation. I want to talk or ask a little bit about sort of pulling out of this bigger context, because one of the things I think you did so powerfully here was to sort of show Salem, and then you sort of zoomed out progressively to, Baltimore, national politics, and this sort of thing. And I think especially in the States right now, given the fraught nature of national politics and the sort of the ways in which decisions by an unpopular populist president are reacted to by folks on the ground. To maybe if we could talk a little bit, if you could say a little bit more about the sort of public debate, right? So that Ballad of Kuala Batu, for example, right, and that one piece that was reprinted in the Salem Gazette, right, where reacting to a really, I think, vibrant national conversation, which involved both sort of isolationist tendencies about we shouldn't be doing what we criticize the British for, but also, I think really importantly, with accounts coming out of papers like the Observer, for example, right, this abolitionist paper that had seized upon some of Warner's accounts of women and children, particularly being killed, which sort of provoked a kind of progressive response to this, right? So the national response was, by no means all the jingoistic sort of ballads and stuff. In many ways, that was responding to a really sharp critique that grew out of American civil society at the time that was both castigating the general idea of Americans going abroad and projecting force, but really, especially, really calling to account the Marines and Jackson's policy in particular for the sort of savagery it inflicted on the people of Kuala Batu. And I wonder if you could maybe zoom out and give us a little bit more of that public debate. Yeah.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. And I would love to learn more from you about how these attacks were covered in Sumatran Indonesian sources. Maybe we can talk offline. Jackson's opponents used the attacks, especially by the Potomac, as fodder for evidence of an out of control president. Out of control. You brought up the connections to contemporary politics, but of an out of control president who was mismanaging or overreaching, the executive, the power of the executive.
Yeah, it's hard not to hear the rhymes at this point.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's very, very clear that the Jackson administration, including, and this is where the Secretary of Navy, Levi Woodbury, is very interesting because he has deep connections to maritime shipbuilding. He's a New Englander. I believe he's from New Hampshire. He has deep connections too, and one of the ship owners is a U.S. senator. It's all kind of tied together, but it's very clear that the Jackson administration and especially the U.S. Secretary of the Navy, Woodbury, are at this time looking for an excuse to show the world, not just the Asian nations and empires with which we are trading, but to show the world that we, the United States, are no longer an upstart, backward colony, but we have the economic power as well as the military might to protect and defend our traders overseas. And so, this is a prime opportunity for the Jackson administration to do just that. And it's clear from the naval instructions, of which you could see a screenshot from, the idea was for the commander to seek a negotiation, to demand retribution from the perpetrators and compensation. um, they were not there were no clear orders to send 250 Marines, and especially to disguise the ship as a Danish merchant ship. I mean, there were all sorts of aspects of this attack which were quite ugly. But yes, this is part of the larger political environment, and that Jackson's political foes really used the battle to highlight and to advance their political position, anti-Jacksonian position.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like for example, especially coming out of the abolitionist circles, right? The sort of the attacks on Downs in particular, right? The way in which he flagrantly violated the marching orders that came from the Navy Department. I think that's a really important part of the story as well, right? That this was
Mm-hmm.
a very heavily debated U.S. topic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Suzanne has a hand up, so I'll let her go. But just briefly, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the Sumatran sources. One thing I think is really interesting, reading that account from Bentley, right, where he talks
Mm,
about toast being raised. What was it? Toasts were given and no offenses were made, or something like
yeah.
that. It's really interesting because at the same time in Sumatra, in the, going into the mid 19th centuries, after the British pull out of Bencoolen and after the Treaty of London in 1824, they leave behind a large number of Bengalis, right? Some of
Mm,
whom were sepoy soldiers who were manning the forts. A lot of them were transported convicts. And one of the things that develops in the local Malay culture there are these sort of tamasha, right? These sort of almost South Asian style public parade
mm,
celebrations, which involve an awful lot of cosplay
mm,
and eventually to sort of local Malays, in a sense, speaking in tongues, right? Visiting Sufi shrines there and suddenly channeling what they call Bengali, right? Which
mm,
is often just gibberish, but like sort of communicating this. And so I think also like looking at this kind of cross-cultural cosplay would be a really interesting thing, right? This is something that's going on not just among Yankees in Salem, but in Sumatra itself. We've got this
mm-hmm.
19th century sort of cosplay ethic in which we've got, you know, local Malays uh, adopting bits of Indian culture and in, Indian China and elsewhere, these representations of people from the Nanyang, right, from the
Mm-hmm.
South China Seas and these sort of cultural masquerades, I think is itself a really interesting topic, right? It sort of
Yeah.
pokes back at a lot of the way that we think today about engagement with the other, right? In
Mm.
ways that are quite shocking. So
Yeah. I
that
guess
was
the one thing that I would add is that while this is happening in the United States in relationship with Asia, it's also happening in relationship to playing Indian or donning native what people thought were Native American costumes, and also, of course, blackface vaudeville.
blackface. Yeah.
It in the United States, because of our histories, this kind of cosplay has other meanings.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
Well,
that's what I think.
or maybe not so different, but there are the U.S. context, brings a particular set of questions with it that relate to the status of Indians, African Americans, and others in the United States too.
Suzanne, go ahead.
Um, well, first, Professor Lee, you just dazzled me. That was the best thing, and I really am so grateful that you took the time out of your busy life to work on a presentation just for us, that wasn't something that you already had on your hard drive. So I really, really thank you for that. Um, History is not my wheelhouse. I'm a retired professor of art at a college of art and design in Boston. So imagery is my wheelhouse, and I really agree with you about the power of images. And my own presentation was on 19th century illustration of Asian Americans and people of color. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you was if we do recommend changing the seal, um, what kinds of positive symbols and iconography might we feature minus the figure?
I enjoyed your presentation, Professor Barnes, and thank you. I don't think that that's my, I think that this is a decision that Salem residents should consider. And I guess the question would be, what would be the subject? So is it if the subject is Salem's history with Sumatra, but we don't want the figure, then that's the premise. Is it a positive symbol that relates to some other aspect of Salem's history or present? But if we were to stick with the history of trade specifically with Sumatra, I mean, you could extend it to trade with Asia as well. Is that sort of the premise of your question?
Well, I think some of us are concerned about once we let this leave our hands, what it might become. You may have seen the seals, the new state seals for Massachusetts once the native figure has been removed. And honestly, I shouldn't say this out loud. I don't think they're that great. I think the designs are not very distinctive and they're not very powerful either. And I think that in the interests of celebrating our state and its history, there has to be a better iconography than a chickadee or a, anyway, I'll stop there. But I think that what was interesting to me about your talk is that the dove also you brought into question because we had just been talking about the figure and people love that dove. So I was just, if you had any ideas of things that would make also beautiful. I mean, I'm concerned with beauty. And so the creation of a new seal that was had some of the beauty of the color and the watercolor technique
Mm.
current seal, but without the figure.
I think it depends on which aspect of Salem's past and present. So if you did want to keep with the early 19th century and, you know, um, do residents still want to use the history of trade with Asia as the main focus? I don't have a problem with a dove, but if it's a dove to represent U.S. trade with Asia, then I think that tells only a partial story. But a dove can represent other aspects of Salem's history too. So,
Sure.
I think it's about context. Um, a symbol without context, right? The meaning can change quite a bit. So I think it would be a probably very long and protracted public conversation, to think about which aspects of history or present day Salem would residents um, like to represent in their seal if they decide to change it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So let's do VJ, Michael, and then Aditi. And then in the interest of time, we'll try to move on unless people who haven't spoken have any questions. VJ, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor Lee. That was that was very fascinating. I really appreciate that deep dive, very as well as succinctly as you did it. So one of the things that we've been hearing from as well is the perspective of the people in Sumatra, the people of the Achenese. What we've heard so far has a lot of been that the representation is a positive one. Even the clothing, for that matter, being accurate as it is, which also brought into question the idea of the caricature. And if the clothing was accurate for the time, is that a caricature or not, type of a thing? Are we looking at it as a caricature today? In that instance, but we've Dr. Michael Feener actually mentioned something last week about how Aceh was very cosmopolitan, and that's in fact, yes, there are the influences of China, which today we look upon that contemporarily and think, well, it's actually a Chinese person, not a Sumatran person. But the reality is that there was a lot of that cross-cultural mixing. And so one of the things that I guess sort of the question I'm leading toward is the idea that of how the stereotypes that people believe these people to be played a role within the impression that people had versus some of the historical documents that show that those stereotypes were tested by real interactions, and in fact those stereotypes were then broken. I think of Captain Crowninshield mentioned how we had heard so many terrible things about you, but the reality is that you're actually really great people, and this is a perfect place to trade with. But then I see that in the context of Captain Downs when he went to attack Kuala Batu. Instead of making an inquiry of why, for restitution, he just says, I think under the threat of court-martial, I already knew all I needed to hear about these people, and I knew I wasn't going to get anything out of it. So what I'm curious in some ways to know is the negative actions that have been taken under the name of these people are subordinate being done under a stereotype versus the actual person-to-person relationship showing an opposite view of that. Which should be given more weight, or if nothing else, is there a dearth of information that leans one way? Should we give that more weight, or is it all taken? If there's this one source here, does that overweigh everything else? Type of a situation. That's sort of if that was a succinct question, I'm not sure I can reword it if need be. Speaking in drafts, that's one of the things we've been working with here.
It's the question that historians grapple with all the time, right? How much weight does one testimony, one letter, one example, how much weight should we give to that in comparison to another one? And I think for me, so I'm joining you as a historian of the United States. And so for me, the context in which I'm looking at is first Salem and Asia. But in terms of the symbol is most important in Salem. And it's most important in relationship to the people who see it every day, the people who reside there. And the government that is using the seal to represent the work of the city. And so for me, it is the U.S. context that is the most important, and the people with whom would come into contact with the seal, their experiences, both historic and present, seem to be the most important to consider. And so when I look at for example, like the work of Patricia Johnson, she did say, yes, there were examples of friendship and value, but overall, when I look at the vast number of logs and journals and diaries from seamen, it's not so great, the perceptions of Asian peoples. And yes, there could be individual relationships. I know that Poe Adam is a very treasured ally amongst Salem merchants. He wrote to his friends in Salem and after the attacks and asked for refuge in the United States. I could not find any record. This would be his letter is recorded in Endicott's account. I could not find any record that anyone tried to bring him over or tried to offer refuge, or essentially we would call it asylum today. He felt he was being punished for his friendship of Americans. So when I weigh everything together, yes, there's positive interactions, valued friendships, valued merchant relations, but one cannot overlook the outsized, disproportionate, violent response that is represented in those attacks. And when I think about the seal and its symbolism, I think of what was happening around the same time too. So the references to Ah Fang Moi being put on display, how I know that within a decade, these kinds of racial attitudes would lead not just to stereotypes and unequal treatment, but first state laws and then federal laws. So I see these patterns, moving forward in time after the 1830s and 40s that outweigh the smaller numbers of defenders of Asian migration that we would see at the same time. Did that help answer your question, Vijay?
It did. It kind of brought up another one, if I may, real quick. The idea then being that we have these smaller number of defenders, but also what you talk about with the ripple effect that happens throughout the nation. Because one of the things around this conversation is sort of the local context versus the national context. And as we're talking about the city seal, sort of, what were the local ripple effects, let's say, from these, whether they were the attacks where you have newspaper articles on both sides, both defending and condemning it, and sort of just this ongoing conversation in town that of how Asian people were and are treated in a way, which brings up that just this idea that it's always sort of been, there's always been people on both sides of the issue. There's been supporters and detractors, and as it comes to a seal, I brought up somewhat facetiously that it should just be a white circle because someone's going to find offense with something. But then again, I think Dakota, you rightly pointed out, well, why is it white? You know what I mean? Like there's always going to be something, and there's always going to be some element of history that is going to be able to be picked apart. And as the historical record goes, it's more of like taking a stand one way or another on how the city should be wants to be represented based upon the history that it's presented. And so that's kind of where, taking in aggregate all of the local perspectives, how historically that's presented within the current seal as we see it. That's not necessarily maybe a question. I think it was more just you triggered something within my thought process, and I just had to, I guess, say that aloud. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna then move on to Michael and then Aditi.
Thank you. And I know it's my second shot, so I'll keep it brief. Thank you, Erika. I just want to sort of think about, I think what you rightly call attention to is like this local context of Salem, right? Which I think is really important. I mean, I think we can agree to disagree about Johnston's reading about the preponderance of sources. So, I grew up in Salem, been reading logbooks there for 30 something years. And I think that when we look at the great preponderance, like Endicott gets quoted a lot, but it was Endicott's ship that got stolen. And he has an awful lot of sour grapes about that. But the preponderance of sources, I would actually argue, work in a different direction. But I want to think about that very Salem context of the seal in the late 1830s, right? And looking at Salem without necessarily sort of imagining already what we know is going to happen in the 1840s and 50s nationwide after that. right? The dove of peace, which you sort of set up there, not only references that Salem's namesake and going back to scriptural things like this, but I would argue in that context of the late 1830s, especially in the wake of these two much criticized attacks on Kuala Batu, right? This was also bad for business for Salem merchants, right? The 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 trade was already slowing down. This was making it much harder for them to do it anymore. And so, one, I think, really important aspect of why that sort of symbol of peace was put over the representation of the merchant in the Indies was precisely an appeal for a sort of a pushback against this aggressive American policy here, right? That the idea was that they wanted to reestablish the sort of peaceful trade that had gone on from the turn of the 19th century all the way through the 1820s. And I think that is a really important part of the story to be here, that it's not simply saying that that Salem was some specie Americana, right? That basically all the things that we associate going towards the rise of xenophobia in the 19th century America, that actually with that symbol of peace and realizing what's going on in the context of those two military expeditions, that we could actually see the seal there as local Salem merchants whose ongoing relationships with Sumatra in particular were being endangered by this, pushing back and really calling for a kind of restorative peace, which I think makes the city seal, for all of its messiness, a really interesting place to talk from.
I agree. And I was hoping when I went to look at George Peabody's diary, I was hoping that in those pages there would be that that passage that says, because, and I was trying to figure out the attack on the eclipse happens in 1838. The attack by the Columbia and the John Adams happens in January 1839. The seal is approved in its current design in March. So I was trying to do this. Would they have known yet about the second punitive expedition within 2 months?
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
but
know.
they were still pissed about the first one.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
right?
Right. But I was hoping for that, as historians, we look for that
That would have been one.
illumination, right? That said, George Peabody says, I am, so we are so upset about these attacks, and we want to, exactly what you were saying, we want to reestablish peaceful relations. And so this is the symbol of the dove is not only in relationship to our founding, but also aspirational for future generations. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
But I do. This is also where I was thinking though about other imagery that is that on the face of it is focused in positive imagery, images of peace, of freedom and democracy, but often have another motive to it. I don't know if that was what was behind the city seal. I couldn't find the sources to confirm or deny, but it's just one of those additional contexts that for me was a connection.
Thank you. So moving on to Aditi, and then after that, we'll have to move on unless anybody who hasn't spoken has any questions. Go ahead, Aditi.
Thank you. Hi, Professor Lee. My name is Aditi. I'm a psychologist. So, often I think about like the psychological impact of imagery. And I work extensively with API community students, professionals here in the greater Boston area. I feel like you've answered in many ways the question I'm asking. But, you know, um, how do you think how do you think this image on the seal affects and impacts us today as Asian Americans, Um, I know you've answered it in many ways, but if you could still respond.
I have, for the past number of years, I've had the privilege of serving as an advisor to a survey called Status that tracks American attitudes about Asian Americans. And one of the main data points that we have found in surveys over the past 5 years is that most Americans cannot name a single famous Asian American, cannot name a single or are unfamiliar with most events that we consider to be important in Asian American history. And so in this dearth of knowledge and history about Asian Americans, symbols take on an outsized importance. So whatever symbols in film, in literature, they take on an outsized importance because we lack this education in most of our public school curriculum. And so that is why whatever symbols are representative, if there's any question that they are derogatory or that they represent histories that do include discrimination or violence, or even if you wanted to take on the most mild perspective, exotic ideas about undesirable foreigners. If there's any question that the symbol does do that, then I personally would not be in support of that symbol and would find it to be unrepresentative of the diversity of Asian American experiences, my own lived experience, the experiences of my students. So that's how I would interact with any symbol that has a questionable, origin or meaning. So I hope that is helpful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. And so before we move on, I just want to ask Rachel, Dakota, Pucci, last chance before we move on.
Oh,
Well,
I'll just say thank you. Sorry, Dakota, to interrupt. And I really loved that you drew that connection, because I talked as well about Orientalism in art history. I love that you drew that connection, because I had not really seen that with like them seeing something that could be visually very popular. So yeah, I really appreciated that presentation. I'll let others go ahead.
no, I
Dakota?
just wanted to say thanks as well. We've had some really great presentations, and this among them that really reflect on the myriad of ways that this can be viewed here, which has been really helpful in informing us. So I appreciate your time tonight.
Regina, may I quickly, if that's okay?
I think, well, we have to move on for the interest of time. Is it a comment or a question?
It's more of a question, sort of just based upon some of the response that Professor Lee you gave to Dr. Alawat there.
Wait, hold on, because I think, are you okay with that, Professor Erika? Because I just want to be respectful of your time.
Sure. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So there's been a lot of conversation around stereotype, and I think a lot of times stereotypes come from a place of a lack of education in many ways. In fact, I think one of the biggest hurdles we make to or have today is that it's hard to have a conversation and get more of that education out there. And so when it comes to the symbolism of a seal that's supposed to be representative of a group of people, and what you've just mentioned about the survey you talked about, where very few Americans can name any Asian person, is it a place where we sort of need to erase some of the imagery we have because of the lack of education that's out there, even if there is evidence that describes in fact something that would be contrary to the stereotype that people might have because of a lack of information? it's just, I just see this as a trend continuing, and I'm thinking about like symbolism of something representative of a seal, like of a whole city, and where do you sort of hold the line versus let it go? And that's kind of where I'm, curious from a historical perspective.
So again, I think it's a lot about context. The seal, as I understand it from the historical records, is meant to represent U.S. trade with Asia. And so again, I started out, or one of the many questions that I asked was, is an Asian figure the best way to represent U.S. trade with Asia? And you had described the seal or the symbol as potentially being interpreted as representing an entire group of people. And I think that's where it gets really tricky, because without any context, if you just look at the seal, it doesn't, and let's face it, many people don't read or can translate on the fly Latin, so they might not understand that the person with the trees and the motto to the far east with for riches, that they might not put it all together and go, oh, that is representing Salem's magnificent history of trade with Asia. All they see is in today's contemporary view, but also, I mean, going back to the 19th century, all they see is a stereotype of an Asian person. And so we all need more education. I'm never going to say we don't, but is there, I mean, a city seal, any of our state symbols, as Suzanne was describing, it has to have, like ideally it should be visually appealing and you can get the sense of the intent of the message kind of almost intuitively. You don't necessarily want to have to work really hard and put it all together and then connect it to a long 500-word description on the back of it so that you can understand the history, which I think this image, as it stands, requires. It requires a deeper context and history, including any reasoning why the task force would want to keep it or change it, etc. So I am not necessarily answering your question, which might be, is that, if we added more education, would that be enough? I don't know if I'm answering that. But I guess I'm trying to say is, I'm not sure a city seal, any city seal by its design, offers the opportunity for the deeper kind of and contradictory history that is merited, especially around this subject, and especially with the bigger, broader, and deeper history that you all are engaging in, and that I tried to show with my presentation.
Great.
Well, thank you.
You mentioned
we really have to move on. I'm sorry. So,
just inquiry and historical process. This is where the conversation gets to come in, and we, don't often get to have this much time with, professionals like this, unless Professor Erika Lee, you're going to be coming back to us because, more questions are going to be popping up. But you mentioned that it was the, American trade or United States trade with Asia, but it's the Salem trade with Asia. And the Salem trade with Asia is based off of the Sumatrans. I mean, that's what created the wealth, that's what that original relationship was. And so that's why it is so specific in its imagery. And I think I'm wondering if that's where the context gets somewhat lost when we talk about, now we're sort of thinking nationally, but really this is a Salem seal, and Salem's relationship with the Asians were specifically with Sumatra as far as the origin of really the seal is representing what made Salem a city. Like, how did it get big enough to become a city? And it's because of that Sumatran trade as it opened it up. And the origin of its city is with Sumatra, is sort of I think the idea that it's trying to depict.
Well, yeah, I think we'll just leave it at that because I think we're not going to continue in the back and forth. We can always have more questions and we could always have more discussion. So thank you so much, Professor Erika Lee. We really appreciate your time and your presentation. And yeah, please, we'll make sure to email you with any questions if there are any remaining, and please stay in touch.
Yes, I look forward to hearing what you figure out. Please
Thank
let
you
me
so
know.
much.
Thank
Thank
you
Thank
very much.
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Thanks
Erica.
so
Let's be
much.
in touch, yeah?
So let's go ahead and take the 5-minute break and come back at 5:30.
Okay.
All right, it seems everybody's cameras are back on, so we can go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. So the next item on the agenda is the discussion of the report structure. And I can just start us off by saying that I shared an outline that that we created as a task force. It's a very rough draft outline. It combined the draft that I had created as well as Dakota's notes on the outline, and I did run it by the mayor in case he wanted us to expand on something or in case anything was missing. And he just had a few corrections here and there. He confirmed that he will contribute a letter at the beginning, so I left a section for that. But other than that, he said that our outline looks good. So Rachel does have a lot of ideas on how to approach this report because I think it'll be a collective effort, and she has a writing background. So I've asked her to lead this discussion because I think it could really help focus our conversation, and also just she has great ideas on the subject matter. So Rachel, I'll pass it off to you.
I think that my main idea is that it should be as not short, but it should be as readable as possible so that basically, the people who read it are going to be people who have a lot going on, especially the city councilors, right? They regularly get these huge reports. We've done so much research, and all of that research can be included as like an addendum, they will have access to every single thing that we've ever done, all of our presentations, etc. But my main suggestion is that we keep it to like a 3 or 4 page summary before that addendum, so that someone who literally had never heard of what we were doing could quickly read it in max 30 minutes, and then understand what we had done, and then could go in and find further information as needed. That's all.
I agree. Here, here.
Didi, I saw you raise your hand,
Yeah,
so go ahead.
thank you. I also think that we could do a better job of organizing our public drive into sections that can be like hyperlinked on the report, at least a PDF version or something like that. I agree completely. I don't read 29 pages would be a lot, 30 pages would be a lot. You know, I applied for a teaching job recently, and my professor told me to pare it down to 3 pages. People just don't. And again, I also want to reiterate the fact that this is a civic process, right? It's not purely like, I know there are a lot of academics amidst us, but it is a civic document, not an academic document, essentially. So I had to sort of remind myself of that as I was thinking about writing. And, we've had some lovely presentations and things like that. But I mean, folks could have links to the videos for the presentations. We have the presentations there, stuff. So I feel like we have all the information we could point in that direction.
Yeah. So Dakota and then Michael.
I want to say I totally agree with you all in keeping it short and readable. 3 pages seems tight to me. And looking at the outline that we went through, I think 10 to 12 is probably more realistic when we include all the matter like the letter from the mayor and things like that. I just don't want them to make us so tight that we don't lay out all the arguments. Like, I do believe that we can make whatever recommendation we want, but we have to show our work in order for it to mean anything. And I want to give us ample space to do that, while also being conscious that I agree, 20 to 30 pages is too long for me.
Yeah, yeah. So in an effort to make this a little bit more productive, I think a good way to approach this is to begin assigning sections to relevant people on the task force, right? For example, like the letter from chair and vice chair, like obviously that should be written by myself and Rachel, right? So maybe that can help kind of guide our discussion, and I'll see if I'll begin taking like notes on the draft itself so we can just track. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted I mean, thank Dakota for saying what I was going to say, right? That when we look at, we've got 7 sections here, right? I mean, the Q&A, I'm not sure what that is. Maybe that's something that we could, I don't know what that would look like.
Oh, yeah, I can expand on that in a moment.
Um, but you know, even if we didn't have that, just the 7 sections in 3 to 4 pages would be very tough. But I think 10 to 12, as Dakota suggested, is a nice, gives us a nice spread at least, right? So that, you know, I know that we have gotten as a task force a lot of public criticism and stuff, and I think we want to make sure that we can make our arguments clear in the document that we're going to be sending out.
Mhm.
I would say that I think 10 to 12 is too much. I mean, I think maybe what we can do is separating it pieces, right? The mayor's letter is his own thing, our letter is its own thing. But then when we get down to, let's say, number 4 to number 10, that's where I feel like, I mean, again, I want to say that all of us here, there are a lot of academics here, and there's a lot of people who like love details and we love reading. But I can also say as a writer that the average person is not like this, right? The average person really just like struggles to read like a news article from, you know, beginning to end. And this is a fact that we kind of have to accept about the digital age. So I just want to make sure that in a way, we're not trying to erase the fact that we've done so much work. We're trying to make it more accessible. Like, I think that that's a main thing for me is like, is this document accessible? Is the language simple and clear? You know, to someone who is, I don't know, let's say like one of our youth commission members, right? Like we want, is the language clear to someone who's like maybe first language isn't English? So again, it's like if we can minimize the wordiness and keep it to like a maybe a slightly lower lexile level, right? As someone who used to be a former English teacher, I think that's really important in keeping things short and concise and very clear.
Suzanne, and then Pucci, and then Michael.
So one of the things that I sat down and read this morning was those beautiful statements from the kids that Rahina and Aditi did in that workshop. And I was struck by, first of all, how kids are so great, and that they're the future residents of Salem. And I wonder if there's a way, I know we have various folders and letters from grown-ups in support of or against changing the seal. But I think for me, featuring those letters in some way, they're really emotionally touching. They're easy to read, or maybe just one of them quoting it into our report would be a really beautiful way to show how the next crop of people who are going to be in Salem feel about it.
Well, I think that's part of the storytelling, right? And I think I'm personally gonna lean into Rachel's guidance for that, because I think there's a section for key arguments for changing the seal, right? And key arguments for preserving the seal. And I think it's totally reasonable to include like what were the most powerful and common statements from both sections, right? That's fully relevant and appropriate to include. And we're also going to send the city council a full addendum with the spreadsheet, right, that has all of the entries as well as all of the public input that we've received. So it'll be a pretty massive addendum, right? Because all of the comments from the Salem Youth Commission will be included as well as the survey. But yeah, I mean, like, it's not reasonable for us to expect all of the city council members to read every single one of those, right? We'll give it to them, But yes, it is our responsibility to kind of summarize the biggest arguments from both sides. And I believe, was it Michael next? Or, oh no, sorry, Pucci and then Michael.
Choose next.
Yeah, I also write a lot for a living, but from a marketing perspective, I like to say
Oh,
that I
that's
make
right.
things
Yeah.
shorter for a living. So happy to help with like copy editing to cut things down, but I don't want to fixate to some of these folks' points on like the page number. Like, let's get the draft down. We can edit, consolidate until we feel that it's not missing anything. That being said, so much can be organized through the structure, right? There's a good table of contents. People can get to what they want. I think that's a big part of it. But then also, is there an executive summary, or is that the point of one of the preceding letters? Like that usually, if we can get it down at the end, distilled to one page, I think that's also going to be key, whether it's 30 pages after or 5.
That's a great point, Pucci. And maybe instead of a letter from the chair and vice chair, it can just be an executive summary. That might consolidate it even further. So I'm just going to change that right now, unless people feel strongly that our perspectives as chair and vice chairs need to be included. Okay,
Great
executive
idea.
summary.
Great
Great.
idea.
It can
Great.
be from both of you, but
Exactly.
Yes.
Great. So then relevant history. So
Uh,
I'm going to take, oh yeah, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Pucci. I think that the executive summary actually would be a very good idea. So um, I spend a lot of time writing sort of co-authored pieces a lot, which, is a particularly painful form of writing. And one of the things that I found useful over the years is something like this is that, because I think Regina wants to move into sort of assigning places and stuff, assigning people to write particular first draft chunks before we go back and forth with them. I think it's also very helpful just to, in general, we don't want to be sort of so constricted by word count, but it's really good to give a general sense as we go through this so that when everybody gets their thing, they say, okay, I've got a 500 word chunk here. I've got a 250 word chunk here, right? It's actually very helpful first so that the drafts people are aiming for first have already tried to get somewhere close to the allocation, right? So if we think about, what we think we'll need to get a clear and concise, non-wordy, accessible bit, maybe as we go through this table of contents, we figure, okay, so the mayor's letter is going to be its thing. It'll be a PDF on its own. Boom. But from the executive summary onward, we should start, I think, to think also, right? So the executive summaries are going to be one page, right? If so, we're looking at, say, 250 words or something like that. And then try to, as we go through and assign different people, I see Dakota and Suzanne already have some assignments here, and for the rest of us too as well, start to give a kind of a general chunk of words that they can work with would be very helpful, just based on my experience.
Yeah, so I think that was my first attempt to kind of begin to assign things. So this is very much up for discussion at this point. So,
And what's the deadline? I think more
yes.
importantly, like, is this due the day of the vote, or is there some period of time that this would need to be finalized after the vote?
Great question, and one that we had to address this meeting. It's not the meeting where we vote is not the deadline for the report. We can kind of set our own deadline for when we want the report to be submitted. I suggest that we don't take too long after the vote because yes, like I think it'll just be better for everybody's capacity and for everybody, like the freshness, honestly, of everything that has transpired, to be present in our minds when we write it. Like we don't want to like say, oh, let's do this in February, right? And then we've forgotten everything that we've learned so
Well, it's
far.
more like, do we have a week after something? So it's
Yes,
not
I think it's
the
up to
same.
us to collectively decide as a group how long we want to take. I suggest we give ourselves a deadline of like maybe a week after the report, or however long people think they need to wrap up their sections, so to speak.
I like
So
deadline, so sorry.
let's do Dakota, then Aditi if you had your hand up, and then Michael. Oh, you're on mute, Dakota.
I saw it as soon as I opened my mouth. So I think this is the one sticking point that I was thinking about and revisiting this outline in preparation of this meeting right here. And I want to be truthful to what we've decided on our timeline and everything. But the thing is, we're going to take that vote. There's going to be yeas, there's going to be nays on changing it here. After that, we are all going to have to come back together and say, okay, here's the vote we take. What are the recommendations from here? And some of those recommendations are going to have to be next steps for the city council. So it's not going to end with us taking a vote. And that's where I do worry that maybe we need, maybe we work extraordinarily quick and we can come together on that recommendations section after the fact. But I do wonder if we don't need one more meeting, after we get over the hurdle of that vote to actually say what are our next steps here. I say that
good point.
I know what we all agreed to, and I'm willing to make it work if we got it. But it did strike me as a pretty tight timeline to both vote and then get enough time perspective on that vote to come back and do some recommendations for next steps.
Yes. Okay. Aditi.
Yeah, absolutely. Dakota, I was actually going to echo what you were saying. And I guess my follow-up would be that, is there a process, like, while we write the report, like, do you indicate, like, once we take a vote, does that just officially go on a record and there's, I don't know, a slip of paper that we give to the council? I don't know how this is done. It's my first time being on a city committee. So does it immediately then do we go tell the council, do you tell the counselor, the counselors, or do you wait to write this report and then we
Yes,
send it across?
great question. So we will take a vote on October 20th as we collectively decided. Then our task will be considered complete once we submit this report with the official recommendation and the outcome of the vote from the task force, right? So that's why just logistically speaking, Dakota's right. Like there will be just a little bit of turnaround time for us to write into the report what transpired at October 20th's meeting and to wrap up any remaining arguments from that meeting. So yes, I think it's totally reasonable to say we will probably have to schedule one more meeting afterwards. And then there was one other piece to your, oh yes. And then the city council will receive our report, and then it's up to them to schedule into their own agendas and their own timeline when they will consider the matter, right? So it's not necessarily that they will put it immediately on the city council agenda. They might
Okay.
decide to push it to December or to another time, right? Like that's kind of beyond our control. That's entirely up to the council and the city
Yeah,
council
I guess I'm
president.
just my clarification question is that if we take a vote on October 20th, our vote then sets the process of writing a report, and then if that official report and our recommendation is then sent to the city council, and that report is considered our official statement,
Conclusion.
not the vote, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my
Yes.
understanding is our charge is to make recommendations, not just a vote.
Sounds like.
Correct. Yeah, and in fact, I think one of the mayor's edits in the in the actual introduction that I wrote was the submission of this report marks the conclusion of the city seal's task force responsibilities. Because yes, I think that was the final charge that we were charged with according to the city ordinance. So our task is not considered complete at the vote, it's considered at the submission report. Okay, Michael and then VJ.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I think to follow up also on Dakota's point here, right? Like there's going to have to be some sort of follow up. I think we need to also create a sort of a timeline for, everybody writing their individual bits, feedback on those individual bits, and then agreement on the final edited form of this, right? I mean, there's obviously some significant disagreement among members of the task force like that. And because we're not allowed by procedural rules to have all these debates on the email thread, right? These have to be sort of
Yeah.
public debates. So I mean, again, from writing so many co-authored pieces over the years, that this is a process, it's an iterative process, and it needs a little bit of space, right? So I don't know how we want to manage that logistically, right? We've got to make sure that we get through a process where there's a submission, there's at least one round of editorial feedback, there's a response to the editorial feedback, and then there's a finalization of the text. And this all has to be done in public view in line with the official regulations on a task force, right? We can't do this all on a closed email thread. So logistically, how do you think we'll be able to handle that?
So what I would suggest is that we assign sections
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
And then we also keep it to, a certain limit, right? So I'm thinking each section should be no longer than 1 page. And then at the October 7th meeting, we will then reconvene with a draft. And then we can begin to discuss how we approach next steps, right? In terms
October
of
7th?
yeah, because that's when our next meeting
Right.
is, so
But
we
the
can at
vote
least
is,
touch
but the,
base.
right. But the vote's on the 20th, right? So I thought the
Correct.
report would come after the vote.
Well, I'm thinking we can begin writing it. Like we won't like the report won't be final at that stage, right? Like we will still
Okay.
need to include, of course, the considerations from the presentations in that day and all the public input, but I don't think it hurts to begin writing the sections, right? Because there's some sections that we already know what we've been doing,
Okay.
like the summary of the
Yeah.
task force activities. We can even begin writing the key arguments for changing the seal, right? So I don't think there's a
Okay.
harm to begin drafting a lot of
Okay.
this.
That
Then
that
we
will
will,
help actually. Yeah, that
yeah,
will help.
exactly. And that will
So
give
so
us, yeah, just to wrap up my thought, that will give us a jumping off point for discussion in terms of like getting an idea of like what we need to begin to pare down, and come up with a strategy at the October 7th meeting. And then we can, of course, continue the discussion on the October 20th meeting after the vote.
okay. So how far in advance of October 7th do you want people's draft sections in?
Just at the October 7th meeting being the deadline for people's sections.
Okay.
And I think your suggestion of 1 page per section is a great starting point. Like, don't write more than a page maximum, and then we can pare it down from there, you know. 'Cause some people need that type of guidance, and we can use that as a guidance and then shorten it from there. And then VJ and Dakota.
So yeah, sort of jumping off that latter point there. We're not going to have all sections drafted by that time. Like for example, there's still presentations we haven't heard from yet, that we're going to be writing drafts of before we hear the presentation for. You know what I mean? It's sort of like what's this first draft going to like? What's in place for this first draft that we're supposed to be getting in a week? Is it just the logistical stuff, like the things that we already know, like the well, let's pop it up here. Like for example, the introduction, the Q&A, the summary of the expert presentation. Like, I mean, even to considering that, right? There's still a couple expert presentations that we need to hear from. I'm just
Yeah,
wondering how we write it, but then we hear from it And then do we go back and edit that again? And is that completely different from what we've already written? You know what I mean? It's just sort of like, should we really be doing this right now? Or should we get all the presentations in and then start talking about that?
Rachel, I saw you on mute, so do you?
Yeah, I would like to just say, I think that, of course, I know that you and Michael have some presentations and some information that will add to this. But I also think that it shouldn't be a problem to summarize the stuff that's already been said. So that then when we have your presentations, we can just add whatever additional information is in that section. Right? So, because
Okay.
what was said before your presentation won't change. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and that was gonna be my response as well, is like, well, of course, we haven't heard the final two expert presentations, but we've heard all of the ones before, so we can begin summarizing those just for time's sake, right? Um, so yeah, let's move on to Dakota and then Didi.
I think that to follow up on Michael's point there, I would be really interested in, I guess, some guidance on, what the editing process looks like and how we can go about and do it. Because the easiest way to be editing it is to be looking at the page together. And I don't know how we do that and meet all the public meeting rules. So maybe if we could get some guidance on from you or from the attorney or whoever on how to go about that process, that would be super helpful to us because I'm a little bit at a loss as to thinking about how do we do all that because Michael brought up a good point that I hadn't really thought of there of like we've got to do this in front of the public. But surely there's some allowance for us to do stuff behind the scenes and get ready to present it to the public, right?
Yes,
As long as
so
we keep an email trail that's discoverable, right?
yes and no, but to expand on your questions, so what constitutes a violation of open meeting law is when people have deliberations about something that's on a formal agenda and a formal vote, right? So, like in other words, we know that the report is going to be in future agendas, right? So we can't be like having all of this dialogue back and forth around the contents of the report or the vote in an email because that's considered outside of the public meeting forum, right? What we can do, however, is that doesn't prevent individual task force members from talking to each other about certain sections, but you don't want to have uh like group meetings about this, right? So like Dakota, you talking with Michael about one section would be okay and permissible. What you want to avoid is then adding like Poochie and BJ, because then that gets close to a quorum, right? And that is an open meeting law violation. So I think like if people want to touch base about certain sections, that's okay, especially over email. Um, you just don't want to do it with like the entire group, and you don't want to do it with anything that's remotely close to a quorum, which is 6 people.
Yeah. And I think that I guess my concern is as we get to cutting and condensing and figuring out, what everybody feels are their important bits, we may have to pull together a few more times than we think we're going to have to if that's the way that we've got to do it.
Mhm,
Because I don't know how to do that without having everybody here to weigh in on that stuff.
mhm.
And I
Right.
again, I'm feeling that it extends us longer, and I,
Yeah.
I
Well, and
know
that's
that,
why I
but I
suggest we
just don't
have
know how to do it.
Well, and that's why I suggest we have a draft to guide our discussion by October 7th, right? Which seems like a really tight deadline, but that will really guide our group discussion around like what we need to condense. Um, so I really want to get to assigning sections. So let's do a DD and then let's dive into that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rita, for clarifying. I think that like one thing I also just want to add is as an inquiry is that writing a draft or putting my information on this like shared document, um, that in itself doesn't seem like it's violating the open meeting law. It's just that if we then start as a group emailing back and forth saying, hey, take this out, add this in, or I think this about, or you need to add, to have any of those conversations, we need to meet in person in a public, or not in person, but like in a public forum to make that bit happen. But we can continue to contribute to the document, to the draft as in our own way, right? Like, so as long
Correct.
as we're not talking about it together in more than two people.
Yes, and
Is
I
it
thought that
is it
was
allowed to be a
clear.
shared document though?
Yeah, because we
Um,
can comment and stuff. So is the commenting part a violation?
So my understanding of that is you don't want to get in, like, comments are okay, just don't respond to each other's comments, because then that's seen as deliberation. But if Pucci, if you want to comment and say like this needs condensing, like that's perfectly fine. But what you don't want to do is like, get into like a discussion or argument about like the history of the seal.
Right,
Like,
that's what I meant. That's what I was
yes.
asking. Okay.
Yeah. That's where it's like we assign each other, like that's where we assign each person as a section, and then we will collectively discuss it as a group in our next meeting.
Absolutely aghast that you'd asked me to control myself on the internet.
Sorry, Dakota. Well, and if anybody's curious, that's actually why we don't have a chat, right? Because the chat is considered deliberating outside of the public forum, so that's why the chats are disabled in these meetings. Just
No, it makes
just
total
fun
sense. I'm
open
just
meeting
goofing.
law stuff,
Sure.
BJ, go ahead.
Just one question, just because I didn't see it on the draft here, but correct me if I'm wrong. The public input responses and how we're gonna aggregate that, or we talked about the reason moving from jot form from the previous one, and then taking a look at the responses as a whole. How are we going to distill that? All that kind of stuff. Because I assume we're keeping that open until our vote on the 20th, and then what's the plan for that? And then how do we incorporate that into this report?
Yes, and that's exactly also part of the reason why we would need a meeting after October 20th, because we would probably close the input forms at that date, and then we would have to have some time to compile any remaining findings into the report where appropriate, right? So I think that's where we can dive into assigning sections. My suggestion is whoever ends up with that section, which Pucci, it might be you because you have a marketing background, and I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. But my suggestion to whoever ends up with that section was to use AI tools to help summarize a lot of, because it's 400 responses, right? Like a lot of that is really hard. And then of course you use your critical thinking abilities to pull out the more, to one, check its accuracy, right? Two, make sure that it's actually communicating like what we want to communicate collectively, and that there's some a powerful message coming across, right? So that's what I would suggest there, unless anybody has strong
I would
opinions about that.
I would just say that because we have two forms, I think we should write why we changed forms, right? We talked about, we knew that some people, I think we have to be very clear about the fact that we had seen posts where people were like, please just copy and paste this and keep sending it to the jot forum, and that we had no information, and that some of these were very similar. So I think that that has to be like when someone looks at and says like, oh, why are there two forums? It's like very clear. And like, why are there so many responses that are nearly identical? It's very clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Michael, that might have been something that you may have missed. So just to fill you in very
Yeah, I was just
briefly.
gonna say because I didn't know about this duplicate cut and paste stuff because I didn't see it when I went through the spreadsheet, right? The spreadsheet
Yeah,
that was sent off before that, I didn't see that there. So was that in a different batch? Have those been now sectioned out, or where is
no,
that?
so
Where's,
there was no easy way to do that. So we left all of the entries untouched as is. We saw
in the spreadsheet, right?
Correct.
in
The
the spreadsheet? Okay,
spreadsheet with the entries. Yes.
okay.
So part of the discussions that we had while you were gone was that there were some concerns raised about the fact that um a lot of the entries looked similar, and on some were really like it looked like the wording was just changed slightly, right? Then to further our concerns, there were screenshots of social media forums where people were saying um, something along the lines of, "Oh, make sure you submit this as many times as you can. You can submit entries." So that's the reason that we changed into jot form,
Ah,
because in jot
this,
form you can track IP addresses. Therefore,
right,
you can make sure that each response is coming from
a
one
different person.
yeah, a
This
different
is really
person.
important. Can I get some of those screenshots so that I know what I'm looking for when I go back and review the spreadsheet again? Because I hadn't seen this. So the screenshots of these social media posts?
Um, sure, I can share those with
Yeah,
you
because I
as
didn't
well.
know about this. This is a really important part in terms of making sense
Mhm,
of that spreadsheet. So if you could
mhm.
share those would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll see
Yeah,
what I can do. Yeah.
thank you.
It's also, I would also suggest that you go back and look at the recordings where we did talked
Yeah,
about this. I don't remember which exact meeting
yeah.
it was.
This, I emailed you a couple of weeks ago. I still can't get in. I still can't get into the share drive. This is one of the big problems I'm
Oh,
having.
but the
Catching up.
recordings aren't on the shared drive. They're on the website. So
Right.
I'll send you,
Because they're asking for a password and I can't get in. They're asking for
yeah,
a password for the
the
recordings.
password is on the recordings itself. I'll send you another email, but
Okay.
yes,
Yeah, please
it's
do. Because I've been trying
yes.
to catch those
The
two
the
meetings and I can't get those yet.
the public drive is completely separate than the rest of the meetings with the agendas and recordings. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Also,
Thanks.
I
So,
just
but yeah,
want to say,
so
like,
I'll need to,
non-Salem emails, Barracuda is coming up and saying, like, there's a lot of like non-Salem emails sent our way, and it just immediately goes to non-salem.com emails. Keep going through the virus thingy and blocking them. So I just want to say, if you're Michael, I know because you and I think Noreen sometimes use your non-salem.com email. So you just want to
yeah,
make
I have to
Oh,
sure.
because I have to because
No, no,
I
I know
got,
you, but just
yeah,
please
yeah.
make sure that like you check the salem.com email.
I can't get,
he
this is the
can't.
problem, DT. I
Oh,
can't because this is the
bummer.
reason I had to do that is because there's a physical token that's needed for me to get restored
Yeah.
access, which is hard for
Yeah.
me to pick up.
Okay.
Very, very long story short, uh, IT couldn't figure out a way to give Michael access because it quite literally puts our entire system at risk.
I
And
see.
so we were considering mailing him a token, but instead we came up with a much more reasonable solution, which is copy everything on both his
I got
Kyoto
you.
email address
And the
and his
Salem, yeah.
Salem.
Yeah.
But that also means he can't access
Share
the
drive.
drive. He can only access the
Okay.
other stuff. So
Yeah.
that's why I've been sending Word
Yeah.
documents as
And
well.
I appreciate the help,
Yeah,
Regina. This some things I haven't seen yet, like those social media screen caps. So that would be
yeah.
really helpful. Yeah.
So the last thing I will mention about that, Michael, is Aditi's right. Your Kyoto email is going into the city's blockers. So I've
Yeah.
tried to correct that a few times, but it's still happening sometimes. So everybody just kind of be aware of that some of Michael's emails might be going into the Barracuda, and the city has like an automated email that goes out to you. So just actually read those and like hit deliver because there might be something from Michael there.
He can't
Okay.
be
So it
Thank you,
just went
guys.
into
whitelisted?
my junk mail and marked him as a safe sender because
Great.
I
Yeah,
found a couple in
yeah,
there.
Yeah.
yep,
Thanks,
yeah.
Dakota.
Thank
Okay.
you. Because I didn't know how that, I just was not clicking anything that the Salem email said, oh, don't go there. I was like, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so then moving on to this assigning sections. So I already wrote the introduction and the mayor already made edits, so you can take a look at that. So then let's dive into the relevant history. So I'm assuming that this might be something that we can lean on Michael and VJ for. So let's just, or maybe anybody who wants these sections based on what they feel passionate and know the most about.
I would say that creation of the seal and major revisions and variations of the seal are definitely VJ, and I'd say A probably two with input from Michael. D could be any of us that's been here since the beginning, which would exclude me.
Yeah. I mean, if VJ's going to take B and C, I can easily take A, right?
Perfect. So
Yep.
that's what we'll do.
Cool. Great.
So you're, Michael, just to be clear, you're in charge of Salem and the spice trade.
Yeah.
Okay, great. The
And
creation
the
of the task
expectation
force.
is A, B, C, and D each come in at about 250 words to start.
To start, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so each section should be a page, or no longer than a page, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Just to give us some limit, right? Because we don't, otherwise we could end up with like 400 pages if
Yeah,
we're not
yeah.
careful.
I think that's totally fair given the deadline and
Mhm.
our knowing that we want to get this edited.
Is D not covered in the intro? Like it just feels like it doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree
that
with
Which
might
one?
be the creation of the task force. That's a good point. It doesn't fit with the relevant history. Should we put that somewhere else?
I think that's just the
Well,
introduction, no?
Yeah, like
I mean,
my
it
only
does.
thought on putting it in there was, did we need to say what happened in Salem that led the city
Yeah.
council to create
This,
this?
Yeah, I
But
think
that's part
Do
how
we
of
this
fit all of
became
that in
an
the
issue for
introduction?
public debate. Yeah.
that. I think I can cover that in the introduction. I'll just move it there and cover it
Okay.
That sounds fine.
rather than
Yeah,
perfect.
I think
And
as long
I'll
as we feel it's adequately covered somewhere.
perfect.
Mhm.
Great. So I can cover that because I think I'm the person who knows the most about that. Okay. Oh, dang it. I hate formatting. There we go. So then summary of task force activities. So the summary of the expert presentations. Rachel, I'm nominating you.
can't those
yeah,
be
I
pulled
mean,
from
when
the
I,
minutes?
sorry?
Can't those be pulled from the minutes by and
I was
large?
gonna say, I'm happy to do it. I already have to write the
Oh,
I
that's
also
good.
think,
But there will
And
be,
I was
if
going
we
to say
keep it to a
too,
page,
I
if
did
we
not
keep it to a
mean this.
page,
is
I did not
this,
mean this as a summary of all of the content that was presented. I meant this more as like, just the sort of here's what happened sort of thing, because I assume that the content of the presentations would be incorporated into the arguments.
Right.
Well,
And I think the still point still stands that a lot of this could just be pulled in from somewhere else. Just trying to keep things moving and short.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Pucci, the reason that I think it's really important to actually keep it is because there's no way in heck that the city council is going to go and read the minutes.
Oh no, I'm
You
saying
know.
can we cut and paste that as from the source, using that as a source material?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
yeah,
what I'm not
yeah.
saying.
However,
But it will have to be,
Yeah,
even the
exactly.
minutes, yeah, because
yeah,
even the
it's
minutes
just a
now are,
list.
yeah,
Is that
because
correct?
even the
Yeah, or
minutes
is it
now
just
are
a
like,
list of the
yeah.
dates and times?
yeah, it could
Like-
even
A
be a
list of the
list and
dates and times and
And
like
like
a
one
sentence
sentence.
summary
Yeah.
of like
Mhm.
what
exactly.
it is
Okay.
about.
Cool.
And then like, here's the link, go
Yeah,
please.
here's the link to
Here's the
watch
link.
the full minutes and recordings. That sounds great. But yeah, I think it's really important to even just write a couple of sentences around like what were the main points of each
Yeah, happy to do
presentation.
it.
Yeah,
Happy to do it.
there's a way to do that, in a powerful way. So Aditi can take that over. What about the listening sessions? Who wants that section?
I mean, I also just, so when I look at this, I just imagine section 5 to be one page. And yes, there are 3 sections, but it is like basically listing the time that everything happened. And like, again, it could, especially because part of this document will probably be a like digital PDF. It can just directly link, on each one to the listening session itself. And if we want, we can do like a 1 sentence summary of, you know, different listening sessions and be like, this one we heard mostly from, you know,
Which I
this,
think
this,
is
or
reflected
this.
in the minutes, right? Aditi had like a breakout, at least
Which
for the
it
first
is.
one, so that was
Yeah.
probably detailed enough.
Like maybe we don't even need to do that. Maybe it's just like a list of, yeah.
And again, my thought was comments and actual content would be reflected in the arguments section, not in this section, that this would just be a list, like you said, basically, with
Yes.
very short summaries, perhaps.
Happy
Yeah.
to do the listening session since I already have that content on me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's.
So that's
it-
Aditi as well, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
In an effort to condense all of that, maybe we can limit all of this section to 2 pages then. And Didi, I'm just gonna go ahead and put this on you as well if you're okay with it.
I am okay with that.
Okay, great.
will do it.
So you're in charge of section 5, which is summarizing everything from the minutes essentially.
And section 4, right? Section 4. We're in section 4,
The way
right?
that
Yeah,
it's coming
we're in
up
section
on
4.
my the way that it's coming up on my
Yeah, I see
document
section
here
5 as well.
is that relevant history is section 4, and
I
that's
see
because we
section 5.
moved the introduction. I think we moved something, so it just
Oh, I
reformatted.
think we replaced executive summary with the letter from you guys. And so I think maybe we now we have both the letter and the executive summary.
Wait, so Rahina, are we looking at 2 different drafts?
So-
Regina,
Documents?
can you
When it
share your
starts with
screen?
the
Yeah,
letter
I'll
from
just
the-
share
Yeah,
my screen.
please. That would be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
It's just, here's what's happening. We are looking at the shared document. Michael is looking at the Word version.
Yeah, sorry.
That's
Yeah.
what I think I'm looking at too. It says
Yeah,
letter from the
same.
mayor at the top.
Yeah.
Oh,
So the
wow.
people looking at
not what I-
the Word document are not seeing the live changes we're making.
Okay.
That's right. And I'm looking at the Word document. So how come I can't see that unless you share your screen? Where are people?
Because again, you'd have to click on the link
On
that
the
I
link.
sent, not the Word document.
Oh,
And you'd have to be logged into your Salem account for it to work.
I
But
didn't. I
it's-
just downloaded the document. All right, this is fine. This
It's
is
okay.
fine.
We can move on. I'm sharing my screen now.
Right. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Ricky-
And so just quick question. So for section C in 5, then the outreach, that's public input forms, both the Google and the Jot forms, right? Is there anything else that's going to be under outreach, or is it only those questionnaires?
I also intended all the tabling that y'all did.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
go
what
on
I'm
to
okay.
here.
thinking.
Okay,
Tabling
that's
input,
good. Yeah, yeah.
as well as the what's
The youth commission, right?
yes, the written public comment that
Okay.
we've received.
Okay, good.
And does that include the youth, the high school kids?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was
But
there a
again,
meeting?
not all the content is going to be here, just that we did it.
We did
Exactly.
Is
it,
the
yeah.
main purpose of
And
this
then that
section.
can come into section 6 and 7, right? The particular bits of that.
Hey,
Correct.
Rahina, in the intro, are you going to include the use of the seal in 1 sentence, or is that something addressed here that I'm missing?
I can include that in, or wait, why do you ask actually before I
Well, I think the
move it?
public should know what the seal is used for. I think that's part of the introduction.
Oh yes,
Mm.
you mean like the whole thing around like what
Birth
the clerk's
certificates,
office
Birth
uses
certificates
for.
and-
yeah.
Yes, yes, I'm happy
Well,
to
and I
do
assume
that.
it's going to come up later in our recommendations if we talk about, you know, if things have to be phased out, if the use continues.
Yeah.
Happy to expand on that. Yeah. Perfect.
Rahina and Rachel, just quickly, just because it was mentioned, was there a meeting with the Salem Youth Commission? How did we get those comments in?
So in a previous meeting, we discussed that we were invited to present at the Salem Youth Commission.
Okay.
So that was really it. We just went in and talked about the seal, and I pretty much just shared I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see your faces. Yeah, we just shared a presentation, or pretty much like a version of what I had shared with you all around, you know, my own presentation, where it was like very basic information about the seal. And then we had them like just do a little exercise where they shared their thoughts. So that was pretty much it. And it was part of the UNICEF thing, which I don't know if you've been reading the news, but Salem's now on track to becoming one of the US's one of 9 US, sorry, children's friendly cities. It's a big deal. There was a whole press tour around it, and the UNICEF people were there, and it really just showed that we are inviting Salem's youth into the dialogue on important local topics.
And I would advise everybody to read those because they're really powerful, powerful young voices.
Great. So again, added to the list of things to
Yeah.
share. Regina.
Oh, I did share that
I didn't know those emails went out
those
today.
yeah, those
They're in
emails
a PDF.
I read them this
Michael,
morning.
that should be in a PDF in your inbox.
Okay, let me check that then right now.
Yeah, so that did go out.
Screenshot meeting minutes, task for report.
It came out
Oh,
today.
city input forms. City input forms. I just saw, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, that came at 2 o'clock this morning, so I didn't grab it. I
Yeah,
didn't
that's
get
quite all right, Michael. All right, so moving on. Key arguments for preserving the seal. I'm
Can we
suggesting.
stop
Oh,
and pull up
sorry.
here real quick, Regina? Oh,
Yes, I
no
think I
problem.
skipped. I
I
think I
was just
skipped a
asking if
section.
we could pull up the document.
Oh, yes, absolutely. All right, it's already 6:30,
If there's a
so
section we
I'm gonna.
skipped, jump back. But before we dig into arguments, I want to ask an overall question about it.
Okay, so we were in this section right here. Salem's exploitative role in the spice trade. Oh, I'm sorry, let's back up. So we were in this section, key arguments for changing the seal, including both expert
So
and public comment.
my question on both 6 and 7 are these appear to be pretty much as I had drafted them when I came in, and
Mhm.
I just sort of pulled these out of thin air. So I wanted to make sure people felt like the major arguments were there in both of these sections. And yes, I think it's good to, we're going to get lots of other sorted arguments that we can cover in section C there, but I wanted to make sure there weren't any major ones that got left out in here, I had captured them all. And I tried to look through the past minutes and everything, but I just wanted to make sure before we headed down this road that they all got captured.
Well, and since that has been assigned to me, the other arguments, what do you see that those other arguments as being, Dakota?
Well, I would see the other arguments as running through all of the public comment we've seen and saying, okay, well, this doesn't fit into these two major arguments that we've outlined for ourselves, right?
I mean, maybe one
Anything
of the
that doesn't
other,
go there that, I would say, if there's one that's totally off the wall, that's limited singularly, that's like, you shouldn't change the city seal because, the alien spoke to me and told me that it was,
Oh, there's a
uh,
few of them. There's the ones about all the lesbians walking down the streets of Salem.
Wait, what?
What?
Wait,
What?
for
Right.
changing the seal or against changing the seal?
Against it.
I don't remember what their point was. They just wanted to talk dirty and their
and, and
Oh,
I
was that
obviously
from
did not
the
mean to,
public input? Was
Yes,
that from?
yes.
Oh,
Comment
wow. I
292.
must have
I
missed
still
that.
remember it. It's scarred in my memory.
mine too.
my
Wow.
my thought, I guess, was that we just can't capture all the arguments. And yes, I know that some arguments might be enough of a minority that we don't have to capture them at all. But
Um,
I think that we should do our best to capture all of the main arguments that we hear, especially if more than one person is coming to us with them.
Right.
And
So
so that was my thought with other arguments.
I'm just going to put this on both of you then, Suzanne and Dakota, so you can work on it together. Does that sound good?
Right.
And
and
yes,
Fine.
you're not limited to the things on the outline. So if through your research and writing you feel really strongly that there's another key argument, just feel free to include it and we can discuss it in an upcoming
Might
meeting. Okay.
might I also suggest, if I know she's already taken, but it seems to me that Aditi might have some thoughts from her own background on harmful depictions of people of Asian descent that we might want to consult with her on. If we could just throw her into that, then perhaps as a
I'd love to
collaborator.
work with Aditi on that. She's got lots of images. And the other thing I would love to do because I'm going to be haunted by it for a long time, is that image of the woman sitting on the furniture in the furniture store. I wonder if we could get that from Professor Lee. That was,
It's on the recording, so you can even take
Yeah.
a screenshot
The
of the
screen cap.
recording.
Yeah, we could do
oh
that.
man, that was something.
Yeah, it was.
I would
Okay.
love if Erica's willing to share slides, though, to be able to get her sources.
I
Yeah.
didn't
Well,
think
also
she
she
emailed
said that
them.
was one of her two favorite images to share, and I knew immediately why. It's so powerful.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
she may not want to seem okay. Never mind.
But also, like, actually, I think I could look it up because when I was doing the API diaspora research, I encountered that image in one of the articles that I was researching that talked about yellowface and history. So, yeah.
Well, and
It's
I
there.
have
You can,
images also that are much, much worse than the ones I showed
I know,
in my.
yeah, yeah.
And I just wanted to, I wanted to throw in because we were talking about key arguments, but one thing that isn't written there that I do feel comes up pretty often is this idea of like, and it's because it's not really specifically about harmful depictions of Asian people, but it's more a sense that I got from some of the comments where they're like, this isn't, remember we talked about having a figure on the seal, especially of like someone from a marginalized community or a minority community. It's more like with the change of Massachusetts state seal, there's this other argument where it's like, should we have these figures in general? And is this like appropriate for our time? Like, I guess is the argument that I feel like I hear quite a lot from the comments that aren't necessarily outraged about Asian depictions, but are more just like,
Oh,
what do you
that's a
So
think
good
about
one.
adding something like that?
I
how could
grouped those.
Really
we,
good.
yeah, so one person at a time. How can we concisely add that? So should we,
Or could that be its own paragraph, Rahina? I think that's Rachel really nailed something there. It's like at the base of the heart of our
so
study.
it sounds like that would be its own little section, but how can we concisely just write what Rachel just said?
Or we could fold it in there with other arguments.
Oh, under key arguments for changing the seal. I see.
Yes.
Like, why do
Well,
we?
and I also think you could throw it in as the opening section of B and be like, okay, these are the things that are going on in the larger world, and here is this specific one, and dig into that a little deeper.
Does that
Wait,
feel that
no.
wait, how would you summarize what you just mentioned,
I was just
Rachel?
saying that people, because we are changing the Massachusetts state seal, right, and we're removing the indigenous figure, there's a growing awareness of like, is it appropriate to have a figure, and like how basically what should like, I don't know, someone help me out, but you know what I mean? I think that especially from younger people, and I'm saying like people like 20 and under, or like in their early or mid 20s and under, there's this sense where they're like, yeah, because we don't want these images.
Right.
We know that this doesn't feel appropriate anymore. It's
Oh,
like not about who it is, it's about the fact that it's like
And
it's a figure of
Yes,
someone who's a
reconsidering civic symbols
minority.
seems like a really good point.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a like, I don't know. We can go
Yes.
back to that later.
Reconsidering
Yes,
civic
thank you.
symbols.
There we
Great.
go.
It just took us a moment, but we got there. Include examples like, okay,
There we
Yeah,
go.
perfect.
That looks
Yes.
good.
perfect. Okay, so moving on to key arguments for preserving the seal. Including both expert and public comment. So I'm thinking, yeah, so who wants to take this on?
I mean, Vijay's got good research pointing in this direction. I'll
Yeah.
also say I'm happy to help because I got the counter argument, so it makes sense that I should take a little bit on this one too.
So
Yeah, I
VJ
think,
and Dakota.
yeah, I think that
Oh,
would,
sorry, I don't know why I keep.
and
I
I'm
think
happy
Mike,
to join. I'm
yeah,
happy to join in on that one as well, right?
that's right.
Okay,
Oh, and for sure on B, Michael.
Yeah.
I think nobody has a better handle on that one than you.
Okay.
great.
But I can also on section A, I can also join in with you and VJ if you like on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say just Michael on section B. He knows that better than I'm ever going to be able to provide unless you just want me in there for some reason.
Yeah, no, it'd be good to have you in there as a sounding board too, Dakota, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Wait, so does that is that accurately reflected the way I have
Sure.
it captured?
Let's
Okay.
let's leave it like that, and we'll just, because we can talk to each other individually, we'll just decide who's going to take the first draft and on each of these
Okay.
and come back and edit on those ones that are assigned to two of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in that case, also maybe up in section 6A on the Salem's exploitative role in the spice trade, I can join Dakota up there as well, right?
Please, that would
So
be
we have
awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
All right, great.
that'd be great.
And then other arguments? Who wants to take other arguments? I guess
Yeah,
I can do that.
yeah.
VJ and Michael.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where this would go, but we've heard it, I think, at least 3 times. The inclusion of the Achinese voices in our discussion, because I think we've heard 3 times negating their inclusion in the discussion. Is that it's sort of seemingly as a repeated argument that gets brought up? Is that something that should be discussed?
I
mean, that would be under B, I
yeah,
think,
that would
right?
under
That's
B.
under B.
Yes, that was
Okay.
my understanding as well.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Yeah, I just tried to phrase it as a positive argument rather than a response, right?
Yeah, yeah. Dakota, I just want to give you kudos for giving us this phenomenal outline to jump off of.
Right.
Oh, wait until you dig into it.
Well, it's still a great
You may
starting
find it
point.
lacking.
Yes. Recommendations of the task force. Who wants to take this section?
I think
I
that's
can
an
take
all
a
of us section.
section,
I think we have to
or
come together.
I
And
have
that's
I
not
think we'll
been
have to
assigned
all
anything,
do
so
this together. Yeah.
Yeah. And that'll have to come after the 20th, really, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
the vote sort of thing, right?
Well,
I
and
would
I
agree
know
that maybe
I know that Poochie doesn't have a section yet, but that's because Poochie, since you have copywriting background and expertise, maybe you can help us summarize it once
With the
it's
overall
yes,
edit.
I
and
think
be in
you
charge
should
of
be our
leading
editor.
that
Yes.
whole. You're like the main editor. Would you
Yeah.
be okay with that?
You guys need your sections done. They're done earlier. You just need someone to bounce something off of. Yeah, just email the Salem email and
Right.
Great.
Love it.
get that.
And yeah, and I think we're gonna look to you, Poochie, for like once we have a final draft to
Mhm.
make sure that it's all in one cohesive voice, that it makes sense, all of that.
Yep.
Great.
You got
So
it.
then the Q&A we can take out. Oh, let me share my screen again. Just one final time. But I just added it as of this morning because I thought it might be a good way to answer some commonly asked questions. Like I know one question that I've personally gotten quite a bit is like the budget, like how much would it cost if we potentially changed the
Change it,
seal, which
yeah.
I think is a good question, but one that we don't necessarily have the answer to because it's beyond the scope of what we were tasked with, right? So like
Yeah.
answering those questions in the best way possible could be something that might be beneficial in this section, but it does risk making the report really long, but it might be a potentially helpful question.
Yeah, I mean,
I
is
think
there
let's see if we
sort
feel
of a
like
GAO? Has there been some sort of accounting office in Salem attempt at figuring that out yet? Or is that something that's a bridge yet to cross?
Well, we first have to make a recommendation, right?
Right,
Like,
yeah.
because I think the mentality is like, why estimate the cost for something until it's like officially decided, right? But it's unclear. It's really unclear. There's also the question of timeline of how long any changes would be. All of that is up in the air. And we,
Could be a
at
good
any
fit.
rate,
Okay, so the Q&A is really more like an FAQ kind of thing, right? Like a frequently asked questions,
Yeah.
right?
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess I'll change it just for clarity's sake.
I mean, can you start listing the potential FAQs? Because some of it could just be acknowledged in the conclusion as part of next steps or things we know, things we don't know, as opposed to
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Great
FAQ
suggestion.
is to me more factual, and if we don't have any facts to give, I don't know
Yeah.
if we need that, but something to consider.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
So
I'll
like,
list the questions and then we can determine in an upcoming meeting if it makes sense to keep or just
yeah.
scrap.
Or put in some
Because if
kind
it's
of
just the budget
putting
question, I
some
think
kind of concluding note, right? That would be like, you know, if there was a recommendation to change the seal, you know, there'll have to be a cost estimate, right? There'll have to be a time, right? That
the city
the
council
timeline
vote,
for that,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
whole host of things we can remind folks
Right.
of.
So that could be kind of a concluding note, maybe.
Well,
Right.
I'm not sure,
Wait,
just,
hold on.
well,
Pucci,
Rahina,
Pucci had, hold on, Suzanne. Pucci
Right,
was
Pucci.
saying something. Pucci, can you finish your thought?
Oh no, I was kind of talking over Michael, but I think I was like somewhat agreeing with him that it could be part of the concluding note because there are going to be those next steps of the city council vote and so on and so forth. And if you want to bring in, yeah, some of those other things that might happen again, depending on this moves forward, that could just be part of the concluding note.
Mhm. All right, Suzanne?
well, it just seems like, I don't know what you've been hearing, Rahina, but I've only really been hearing two things. One is, why do we have to spend money on doing this? And the other is, they're just going to put a witch on it, aren't they? So maybe if it's just a couple of things, we don't need a whole Q&A for it, but they could be folded into other arguments or one of the other categories.
Yeah, I can include that as well because that has been a frequently asked question.
That's really it. Like, what else
Yeah,
have you heard that's not that? Like,
yeah,
we don't want to spend money on this and we don't want witches on the CO.
yeah. Um, okay, so I'll include that and we can make a decision next meeting. All right, so the conclusion, I think can just be written by Rachel and I collectively, if that's
Does,
okay.
does the report have any appendices or does it just refer back to materials that are in the drive?
I think the way that I was thinking about it is it'll include addendums or links to those
That
things.
sounds good. It'd be good if you don't mind, Rahina, just can we assign you to start a list of what those would be so
Absolutely.
we can add them to the outline?
Great.
Rahina, can I ask a question just because I'm confused about it? Like, are the folders for the written public comment, is that a different folder than from the listening session comment and the jot forms?
So great question. The written input that we have received via email is already published on the drive. The difference is that we took a vote in a previous meeting to not publish the public input form entries until they've been
That's right.
finalized.
That's right.
So that's the distinction there. That's why the spreadsheet with all the entries, that is not yet on the drive, but the public written input is.
Well, because the thing about those, when people write in, those are so thoughtful, whether they're pro seal or against the seal. People really sat down and wrote a very thoughtful, thoughtful, lengthy um, uh, arguments as opposed to the listening session where people talk for 2 minutes. And so I feel like those should be honored with their own folder. Just even some of them are lovely. Even the policeman who didn't want to see the seal changed, he really put a lot of time and effort into that. And so
We can separate those out in the final report.
there's a
That's
lot of
totally
jewels
reasonable.
in that.
Mhm.
And plus, I think it honors the time they took because I was really like some of them are quite long and detailed.
Mhm. Absolutely, we can separate those out. Okay, moving on. So I think we can wrap this up and please aim to have your sections on October 7th and we can expand on that at that point.
The
Okay,
therapist in me and the Halloween celebrator in me wants to bring people candy for this hard work we're all putting in. Michael, it might
yes.
take weeks, but to get to you, but we would love to send you something too.
I'll send you my full address and I'll be waiting for a Reese's cup. That'd be great, Aditi. Thank you.
That's adorable.
But like, just want to do something nice. This is not easy work, y'all. Just
Yeah.
want to say thank you for working together on this. And if y'all like candy, your allergies, I'll be there.
Thanks, Aditi. All right, moving on to meeting schedule because it's already almost 7. Oh my God. Very briefly, tomorrow we have the listening session in the hybrid format. Just very quickly, show of hands, who can be there?
What time is that?
4 to 5 p.m. EST. So the same time. But we end sharply at 5. We
Okay.
don't
Great.
keep going.
I might be a little late to it, but I can make it work. I just have
Okay.
something between 3 to 4, so that ends right sharply at 4. I can try come.
And this one isn't in person and it's a hybrid.
And Zoom. It's hybrid.
Wait,
Okay.
what time did you say it
Yeah, I'll
was?
be
You
there.
said it ends at 4?
4 to 5 p.m. It ends at
Okay.
5.
Okay.
So Rahina, I'd like to do the Zoom option because of my comorbidity for COVID. So how do I just they'll send me a link will come in the mail and
The same way you logged into this
Okay.
meeting today. Mhm. Who can make it in person?
I'm not
Great.
sure if I can
I
make it
just
in
don't
person.
want to be alone in person because if I am alone in person, I respectfully suggest we make it all Zoom moving forward. So Dakota and VJ, if you will be there, great. I will see you there. And it's in the first floor conference room of the annex. Great.
Can I ask a clarifying question for listening session? I don't know if it's rules because it's a public forum. It felt inconsistent last time in terms of like who had to identify themselves or not. Like, is that a requirement before they speak, or are people allowed to just kind of stay anonymous? I don't know if in some cases people just launched into their thoughts, but we didn't maybe quite get
Yeah,
it.
and
Yeah.
iPad, like there were iPad 2s and iPad 3s.
Yeah,
I'm
They need
watching
to-
you. That was my favorite was I'm watching you.
Yeah, they need to identify
What,
themselves when
this
they
was the
speak.
screen names were I'm
Yes,
watching.
that was I'm watching you.
Don't turn on the camera, just I'm watching you.
Yeah. Okay, just let's be consistent. I don't know
Yeah.
if Rahina, you could do that or
Yeah, that might have been something where I was managing too much and I just didn't catch it. But yes, they're supposed to identify themselves and read their address or say where they're from, into the record.
okay,
So
thank you.
please keep me accountable for that. Rachel, since I'll be in person, I'll probably ask you to manage the timer and I'll send you instructions on how to do that. Because I think the timer is really important to keep us on track.
It's on Zoom.
Are you going to be in person or on Zoom?
Where is it again?
The annex, so 98 Washington Street.
In like the first floor, like where is it, like the meeting room kind of?
Yeah, the large meeting room.
I'll see. I'm just doing a lot of driving, so it'll just depend on traffic. But if I can't, I'll hop on Zoom.
Okay, so either I'll ask someone on Zoom to manage the timer. So Pucci, that might be you, or Rachel.
If I make it at 4, I can help.
Great.
If I make it, yeah, I'll let you know well in advance. No worries.
Okay. So see you all tomorrow for that. Then our next meeting after that is, of course, the October 7th meeting with the presentation from Michael and VJ. We'll also add follow-up conversation about the report. Anything for that meeting that we should add as new business? Okay. Then
Sorry, what time is that meeting again?
that meeting is from 6 to 7, and there should be calendar invites for all of these on your salem.com emails.
Rita, I did want to add, feedback discussion, just a little bit. Like, I just wanted to add to the, because, I just saw the email getting feedback today from Michael about the meeting minutes, and I want to make sure that if there are some guidelines that we could discuss about like the meeting minutes in terms of like keeping things objective or language and things like that. If we could spend a little bit of time talking about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. We will be approving the minutes in that meeting, so that can be rolled
That
into
could be
that
part of it.
conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And then October 14th from 6 to 7 p.m. is our last listening session in the same hybrid format, unless we decide otherwise. And then our last meeting on this schedule is our regular meeting on October 20th, so we will likely have to schedule another one after that to finalize the report. Does that all sound good?
Good.
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
Anything under new business? Okay, so that brings us to adjournment. So may I entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Michael. All those in favor, raise hands. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye
you.
all.
Right off.
See you, everyone.